The B-29S had already crossed the Yalu River when the world learned what was happening. 50 atomic bombs, 50 cities, and a president who finally said yes. This is the divergence that rewrote the 20th century. Not Cuba, not the Berlin Wall, but a December morning in 1950 when Harry Truman looked at MacArthur's request and did not say no. The first bomb fell on Shenyang at 9:47 a.m., January 7, 1951, codenamed Popeye 1. It was no demonstration. It was the opening salvo of humanity's only nuclear war. Within 72 hours, 37 bombs had detonated across Manchuria. Beijing's industrial outskirts vanished. Harbin, Anshan, Mukden, centuries-old names, became entries in a ledger of annihilation. Strategic Air Command estimated 1.8 million dead in the first week. It may have underestimated, but the numbers alone cannot convey the texture of those hours. In Shenyang, the January air was bitter cold, -20°C, when the flash came. Witnesses described a second sun rising in the west, then a shockwave that turned the frozen ground to liquid mud. The city's tram system, still running from the Japanese occupation era, melted into twisted ribbons of steel. Firestorms consumed entire districts before the first rescue teams could organize, and those teams, mostly civilian volunteers, had no training for what they found. The wounded wandered with skin sloughing off, their shadows burned into walls behind them. In Harbin, the bomb detonated at 10:14 a.m. local time, catching the morning market at its peak. Thousands of farmers who had walked miles to sell cabbages and pork were simply erased. The city's famous Russian-built cathedral, a landmark since 1907, collapsed into a pile of blackened stone. For weeks afterward, the only sound in central Harbin was the wind whistling through broken windows and the occasional cry of a dog searching for its owner. The world responded with paralysis. Britain's Attlee called Truman. The line went dead. France recalled its ambassador. The UN Security Council met in emergency session, but the Soviet delegate was already flying home with Stalin's orders. In London, crowds gathered outside the American embassy, not in protest, but in stunned silence. The Times ran a single headline: "America uses atom bomb in Korea." No subheadline, no editorial. The editors simply did not know what to say. In Tokyo, MacArthur's headquarters issued terse communiques, but the Japanese government, still under occupation, refused to allow American reporters near the bomb sites. The first independent photographs did not emerge until February, smuggled out by a Swedish diplomat who hid film in his diplomatic pouch. Those images showed landscapes that looked like the surface of the moon, craters filled with glass, trees stripped of bark, and bodies that had been flash-burned into statuesque poses, frozen mid-stride. Now the story becomes far more terrifying than a bombing campaign. Stalin had 5 nuclear bombs in January 1951, crude, inefficient, needing 2-4 bombers that could barely reach Japan. He authorized their use anyway, not to win, but to prove a point. On January 12th, 2 Soviet bombs struck Sasebo, Japan. A third hit Yokota Air Base. 2 missed and fell into the Sea of Japan. The message was clear. America was no longer untouchable. The Sasebo attack was particularly devastating. The city was a major naval port, home to the U.S. 7th Fleet's forward logistics base. The first bomb detonated over the harbor at 6:23 a.m., catching the morning watch change. The second struck the city center 20 minutes later. Together, they killed an estimated 45,000 people: American sailors, Japanese civilians, Korean laborers, The harbor itself became a graveyard of twisted ships. The USS Toledo, a heavy cruiser, capsized and sank with 800 crew members aboard. In Washington, the news arrived via a garbled teletype from the naval attaché in Tokyo. Sasebo, attacked by atomic weapons. Repeat, atomic weapons. Casualties heavy. Request instructions. Truman's National Security Council met in the White House basement. The president chain-smoking through the night. No one had planned for this. The war plans assumed a monopoly on nuclear weapons for at least another 2 years. Now, in a single morning, that monopoly had been shattered. The war became a radioactive stalemate. Chinese forces, devastated, could not sustain their offensive but did not surrender. Mao, from a Chongqing bunker, "We will rebuild our cities with the bones of our enemies." The U.S. Army occupied a poisoned peninsula. Soldiers wore dosimeters alongside dog tags. Clean zone entered the lexicon. A bitter irony, because nowhere in Korea was clean. The occupation of Pyongyang in March 1951 was a ghostly affair. The city had been bombed conventionally for weeks before the nuclear strikes, and what remained was a skeleton of a capital. American troops walked through streets where the only movement came from rats and the occasional survivor emerging from a basement. The dosimeters on their belts clicked constantly, a sound one soldier described as a tiny metronome counting down to something. The army issued decontamination kits, powdered soap, brushes, and instructions to scrub every inch of skin 3 times a day. But the powder ran out by April. Soldiers began washing in rivers that were themselves contaminated. By summer, the first cases of acute radiation sickness appeared among the occupation force. Vomiting, hair loss, bleeding gums. The army classified these as unknown tropical diseases until the casualty count reached 2,000. Only then did the Pentagon quietly acknowledge the problem, rotating units out of Korea every 90 days instead of the standard year. Then came the strange part, the part historians still debate. The world did not end. The Soviet arsenal was too small to destroy America. Americas could not hit every corner of China and the USSR simultaneously. A grim equilibrium settled over the 1950s, colder than the Cold War we remember. This equilibrium was not planned. It emerged from exhaustion and terror. In 1952, the United States proposed a nuclear freeze at the UN. The Soviet Union countered with demands for complete disarmament. Neither side trusted the other enough to accept. Instead, both built more bombs. By 1955, the US had 2,000 warheads. The USSR had 200. China, still recovering, had none. But Mao had already ordered the construction of a secret research facility in the Gobi Desert, staffed by scientists who had studied in Moscow. The facility, known only as Base 404, was built by 50,000 laborers who were told they were constructing a steel mill. Many died from radiation exposure during the early tests. Their graves are unmarked. Now let me tell you about the man who lived through it. Jiang Wei was a railway clerk in Harbin in 1951. When the bomb fell 3 kilometers away, a concrete stairwell saved him. He spent the next 40 years as an administrator on the Chinese nuclear weapons program. In 1995, he told a foreign journalist, "America will never forgive itself, and China will never forget." That sentence captures this timeline's emotional core. Jiang Wei's story is not unique, but it is emblematic. After the bombing, he walked for 3 days to reach a refugee camp in Jilin, carrying his younger sister on his back. Their parents had been at the market. He never found their bodies. In the camp, he met a Soviet engineer who was recruiting Chinese speakers for a special project. Jiang volunteered, not out of patriotism, but out of desperation. The camp offered no food, and the project promised 3 meals a day. He spent the next decade in the Gobi, processing paperwork for scientists who spoke in equations he could not understand. He learned enough to know what they were building, a bomb that would ensure no city ever suffered Harbin's fate again. When China tested its first nuclear weapon in 1958, built with Soviet scientists, transferred secretly via the Trans-Siberian Railway, Jiang was in the control room. Crude, heavy, but working, Mao now guaranteed no one would ever bomb Chinese cities again. The 1960s arrived with 3 nuclear powers, each pointing weapons at the other 2. No test ban treaty, no detente, no SALT. Just permanent low-grade alert, generation after generation. The Vietnam War never happened. America had no credibility after China. Vietnam unified under Ho Chi Minh in 1963. Korean reunification came in 1972 through exhaustion. A single irradiated country, governed from Pyongyang, population reduced by 1/3. The DMZ became a radioactive exclusion zone, warning signs in 4 languages. Today, in 2025, the United States and China are not trading partners or traditional rivals. They are something worse. 2 nations that remember being bombed by the other, who have spent 70 years preparing for the next round. A nuclear taboo, that fragile gift of our 20th century, was broken in 1951 and never restored. If this timeline teaches anything, it is that the line between a terrible idea and a terrible reality is thinner than we imagine. MacArthur believed he was saving the world from communism. Truman, in our history, believed he was saving the world from itself. One said yes, one said no. We are the descendants of that no. Thank you for walking through this darker world with me. If you want to see another history rewritten, comment Sputnik for a Soviet space victory, or Berlin for a 1961 showdown that goes hot. Jiang Wei died in 2003. At 82, his funeral was attended by 3 generations of Chinese nuclear engineers who had never known a world without the bomb. They buried him overlooking the rebuilt city of Harbin, where the new skyline rose from the ashes. His granddaughter, a physicist, placed a single white chrysanthemum on his grave and said nothing. I think about Jiang Wei often, the concrete stairwell that saved him, the 40 years he spent building the weapons that nearly killed him. In the real world, the nuclear taboo held. It was tested, Cuba, Berlin, Able Archer 1983, but it held. We live in the shadow of a possibility that never became certainty. But in this timeline, the taboo was not just broken, it was incinerated. And what rose from that fire was a new kind of fear. Not mutually assured destruction, but the rawer fear of one side that had already proven it would use the ultimate weapon, and another that had proven it would retaliate. There is no coming back from that. Jiang Wei's granddaughter died in 2021 at 59. Cancer, the kind passed down through generations, a gift from the radioactive dust that settled over Harbin in January 1951. Her funeral was small. No politicians, no speeches, just family and friends, standing in a cemetery overlooking a city rebuilt twice, once from rubble, once from memory, and